You're responsible as a leader for your culture of a company. A Harvard study has found that 69% of leaders struggle and avoid tough conversations, primarily due to the fear of conflict, emotional reactions, and damaging relationships.
Why are these conversations avoided? The most avoided conversations are often the most important for team effectiveness. It's actually a kindness, to be honest, from a leader to share with their team members as they are going that this is the expectation and this is where you are. It's not matching, and this is what I'm seeing. Let's work together to put some steps in place to get you to where you need to be.
Conflict can be healthy and it can be good, but if it's moving into more of a personal direction, there might be a time where you have to say, this is enough. We need to step in here.
Welcome to Breaking the Chain, brought to you by Impel Talent. I'm Nathaniel Chapman.
And I'm Terentia Browne. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Breaking the Chain. We've got Nathaniel in the studio with me today. We've got an amazing topic to talk about. I think it's been something that's been burning in the background. I think a lot of conversations in our coaching sessions. So we thought it would be a good topic for us to talk through. The topic for today is the conversations leaders avoid and the cost of that. Super interesting. I actually can't wait for us to have that, to unpack it a bit. So welcome, Nate, to the studio.
Good to be back. And I think this topic comes at just the right time. I mean, a Harvard study that has found that 69% of leaders struggle and avoid tough conversations, primarily due to the fear of conflict, emotional reactions, and damaging relationships. And I think people often fear that they're going to be disliked, lose good employees, it's going to create tension amongst the team. So there's these like major reasons, which I know we're going to explore today, that how we can help people build that confidence and what the important is to address things early, the impact of like potential. So when we were discussing this, actually, Sia, our marketing associate, suggested as a topic, amazing topic. We knew that I knew this was something that people could walk away from this episode and be like, right, I'm not alone here. Everybody knows it's uncomfortable. Every leader has to do it. Everyone has to have tough conversations, whether that's in your professional or your personal life. So I think there's a lot. I think, T, I don't know if you do, but I learned a lot from the leadership stuff that we've done around having tough conversations at work. And I've taken it home with me and into my personal life, which I'm sure annoys some people, the competitive advantage, but really excited on the topic.
You know, people shy away from these discussions. What I found is people know they need to have it. I think this is the key. Leaders know they need to have these conversations, and we end up procrastinating around it. Because for me, what I've seen is they don't have a structure, they don't know how. And so we avoid what we don't know how to respond to. So hopefully, as we speak about the topic today, you're going to get some practical tools, some how tools, how to approach these conversations and how to maybe see these conversations differently, because it is very daunting. It is not everybody's cup of tea. Nobody wants to have these conversations. Nobody wants to hear these conversations either. So it is a two-way street. And I think that's what people anticipate, reaction that will come from having these conversations. And that's what they're afraid of. It's more that the reaction that's going to come from it.
The human interaction is like fight or flight, isn't it? And actually, as a leader, you have to come in with neither of those things.
Yeah,
and I think
exactly.
it's very unnatural. And I think that's the stuff that people then put it off. And what I'm excited to explore, first, leaders need to acknowledge is that if you put it off, there are some serious repercussions that are going to impact your team long term. That actually, once you start to experience that, you realize, actually, I need to have this, rip the Band-Aid off, have this tough conversation now, and realize that it's actually for the benefit of the people that you are serving.
Exactly. So there's three parts. We want to focus on three areas. Really is number one, why are these conversations avoided? So really truly understanding the why. It's different for everybody, but you may experience different whys. We also want to talk through what it costs the individuals, but also the teams and the organizations, because there is a ripple effect. And then we also want to talk about what what does shift when leaders address the elephant in the room? They do address these topics. So let's kick off with, why are leaders avoiding these conversations? I think we touched on just a little bit. Maybe let's go a little bit deeper in terms of from the psychology or that emotional intelligence perspective. Why do you think leaders are avoiding these conversations?
I think the first piece is people think it probably will sort itself out. There's maybe the idea that maybe, I always think that whenever there has to be a difficult conversation, either in my personal life or professional life, you hope, well, maybe we'll just gloss over it. Maybe it'll be something that we can sweep under the carpet. So I think the first point is like maybe avoidance is the solution, which is incorrect. And I also think the second piece is just the lack of confidence and the fear of making the situation worse. Uh, I know we'll get into the, like, when you talk around feedback and having these tough conversations, it comes around what's the purpose of you doing it. I think, and when people are receiving things well, it's when they know that their best interest is actually at your forefront. But it's still not easy to address either bad behavior or poor performance, and I think there's a level of personal, it's very difficult. You have to separate the professional and the personal element to the post, which can be very difficult. People can take things, you take things personally. It's human nature when things haven't gone in your direction. So I think it's also the rise of emotions, and people don't want to put themselves in a situation where they may get frustrated or lose control of those emotions. So I think it's a balancing between those three things. It's ideally someone thinks I can ride out the storm and avoid it. To, they don't feel confident enough to have the conversation.
It does resonate. I think for me, and I'd love to share a bit of a story from someone that I've coached. One of the whys is also linked to the desire to be liked or to maintain team harmony. And I'd love to give an example from someone that I've seen in terms of their strength profile, where they had harmony as their number one strength and they had positivity also in their top five strengths. So, what was happening is that harmony and positivity was working together to in such a way that was to the detriment of the team, the individuals on the team and the team itself, and then ultimately the organization, because this person was operating their strengths in the blind spots. So, the blind spot, when you overdo it, you actually then shy away and avoid all these tough conversations, but actually, it's not helping anybody. It's not helping you as the leader, it's not helping as a team. So, when I had conversations with the individuals on the team, they actually are craving some of these conversations because they want that feedback. They want direct feedback so they can know how to grow. They can, know what are they doing, not doing well, so that they can, work on that elements. But the leader was shying away from those conversations because they wanted to be the nice person, right, the nice guy. And that does not always work as a leader. And so, yeah, I echo what you've said, and I wanted to just add that piece. um,
I love that story.
yeah, it was a very real one.
And
Mm.
that I think the more I've learned through time, and I know we've come back to sports before, but the really difficult conversations is where a lot of the growth actually lives in individuals. And when things are going well and it's positive and it's happy go lucky and woo woo woo, it's like it's great. But actually, when people make mistakes, and when they're and you're trying to change behavior, the outcome, and I think everyone thinks it's like, oh, I'm being penalized, and I think it might be even from growing up or from a level of respect, people can take it really poorly. But when you think, what's the positive outcome that can come from this sort of conversation, or what's the behavior that can shift to make this person a stronger individual, it makes such a massive impact.
Yeah. And I think self doubt from the leader also, where they start asking themselves, like, am I overreacting? Is this really a problem? Or is this the right moment to share it? Or let me wait and see what happens. This is all coming from that imposter syndrome feeling, right? Where you feel like, am I qualified enough to actually have this conversation with my team member? And the thing is that you need to remember that if you are feeling this, most likely there's people around you in the team also feeling it from that person. And it is your responsibility as a leader to have that conversation. Really, talk it through with someone else. So maybe your line manager, if you are a leader and you are having this issue with one of your team members, talk it through with someone first, because sometimes when you speak it out loud, you get that confidence to address it. So I think that second guessing piece or that doubting piece also plays a very big part of why leaders are avoiding these conversations.
And it's natural. I love what you said about bouncing it off another leader or speaking to someone else. I think it's tough to internalize. I think when you're having a tough conversation or there's a challenge happening within your team, I think the response is maybe to bottle it up or keep it to yourself because you don't want to share that there's discontent, or like you were chatting around your one of your delegates who is having that positivity and over, but sometimes you want the perception is that everything's going really well in your team and the team's doing really amazing, but actually that real conversation around, hey, this is a challenge I'm having, can we role play this a bit, can we talk about it together? It helps you get a different perspective because, again, as a leadership, we're supposed to try and remove the emotion out of the conversation, especially when we're mediating or delivering feedback, etc. And that's very difficult to sometimes do on your own. I know we've been in scenarios in our 7 years where it's nice to sit down and break it down with a peer because they can actually give you some real feedback, like, hey, actually the way you're coming across here can feel quite strong, or actually maybe you should try and address it or deliver it this way. And it's just human nature.
Yeah. And what I've come to realize, I think, over the span of my career as well, because I've been guilty of it myself. So I'm not sitting here preaching from, on top of the soapbox saying that I always get it right. But what I've come to realize is that short-term comfort will create long-term complexity because it will build up and add up over time. And so addressing it while the issue is still really small helps you to kill it when it's really small than trying to deal with it when a volcano has erupted down the line. So I think for me, that has been a big lesson, is to address things when we see it happen in real time, because it really helps you down the line. So that short-term comfort really is a false sense of comfort, to be honest.
And it's respectful to the people that you manage or oversee because you're actually calling out that behavior. There's no, I tend to find that people who've like got high performers, or do you know what I mean? They sometimes sweep some of that stuff under because they can outweigh the benefits, but actually having a level, we've talked about this and maybe it's my American upbringing, but I believe feedback should be direct about what's happening in that moment. I know we've had this discussion with Greg, our non-exec director. People have different ways of providing feedback. One of the ways I've loved is I say, if you're doing something right, I will call out that you're doing something right. If you're doing something wrong, I want to call out and separate those things. And if you can do it in the early stages, you're right, it doesn't build up. And it is also not fair to come onto a call with someone in your team and say, here's all this feedback. Here's something I've witnessed for weeks that you've not been able to address in the moment, at the next stage. There should be these verbal confirmations, warnings, if you like, touch points before you start taking a formal process. And that's only fair to the individual. Give them a chance to understand the behavior, correct it, and then it'll enter your normal HR process if those things don't.
I think what I'd love for us to maybe dig a little bit deeper into is, what are the conversations that do get avoided? What are the types of conversations do you think are some of the common ones that people avoid?
I think bad personal behavior. So like when someone makes a comment or even a joke that can be out of line or something that makes other employees uncomfortable, it can be, I think those things can be very easily, oh, I don't want to touch that. That's getting quite fragile or uncomfortable. And I think people forget how much it impacts the team around them to see that behavior not being addressed or spoken to, whether you're addressing it in the moment or whether you're pulling that person aside later. I think anything that can feel quite personal that is just bad behavior, which sounds crazy to say that as adults, but there is still behavior that people do, and it needs to be acknowledged. I'm watching. I hate to say that, I shouldn't admit this. Married at First Sight. I
You
don't know.
love these
I
ones. You
love
love
that show.
these.
I'm so addicted. But if you watch the program, there's adults today that still have incredibly bad behavior, manners. They interact socially. These are a direct reflection of people that do exist in the work environment, although they probably played it up for the series. Um, but no one's. You can tell human beings have never actually been addressed or called out for those things. It's like a reconfirmation that it's acceptable. And if it's happening in an environment, it's acceptable. So I'd say the first one for me, and then I'll bounce it back to you so I don't hog all the airtime, would be those like personal bad behavior, but not that's performance related or anything, but it's like that was not acceptable.
I agree with you. I think for me, one of the ones is addressing underperformance early enough. Because what I've come to realize is that, we assume the person knows they are underperforming. They know that they are missing the mark. And what I've come to realize by asking questions is that in their minds, they are not, because they haven't been given feedback before. And so sometimes they're only hearing that feedback once a year, maybe twice a year. So maybe at their mid-year point or at the end of the year. Yeah. And so it's very hard for someone to course correct throughout the year if they haven't been given this feedback. Yeah. And then suddenly they come to the end of the year and now they have a very low rating that's now impacting their bonus or their compensation for in terms of their salary increase. And they're sitting there flabbergasted thinking, I can't do anything. I actually have no time to do anything about it because it's now at the end of this process. And so I think, again, it's actually a kindness, to be honest, from a leader to share with their team members as they are going that this is the expectation and this is where you are. It's not matching, and this is what I'm seeing. Let's work together to put some steps in place to get you to where you need to be. Yeah. So it really is a kindness and part of that servant leadership approach when you as a leader are actually having conversations with your team members to address the underperformance because you want them to win, you want them to grow, you want them to be better. And it's not to make them feel bad, it's not to point fingers, it's not to blame, but we really want them to be better. And if they are better, then they're pushing the other people around them to be better as well. And so this is really the responsibility of leaders to see these conversations as not only addressing it with that one individual, but there's a ripple effect to the rest of the team as well.
I love what you said there because I reflect back to having coaches throughout my life in sports, and those tough performance based conversations are allowing people to adjust their trajectory in order to meet your expectations. And if you're not clear and transparent that things are falling through the cracks or not acceptable, and I think the individual needs to feel it's a perception issue, which I'm sure is probably we talked about a little earlier. But if somebody thinks I'm just cracking the whip or being disrespectful or I don't like them or I don't want them in the team or I'm putting them on a pip because I want to exit them, then all of that feedback falls on deaf ears. It can be a huge disconnection between what you want from someone. Our goal is to change behavior. My goal is to say, I've seen this, and I've spoken to people around executive presence or around how they're perceived by the business, which can feel very personal. But those things are like, hey, I'm seeing this. I understand how it can come across. I want you to fix it. And I think this is a fixable thing. So let's build a plan to get you where we need you to be rather than waiting till the mid-year review or the end of the period to say, actually, this isn't a good fit or you're not performing. And I think the vast majority of managers, they end up catching people by surprise. It does feel like they've been blindsided because yes, they're understanding that they're making mistakes or there's challenges, but they feel like they have more wiggle room or rope because it's not been addressed or brought up to them directly.
I think another big one is addressing tension between team members or even between the team member and a leader. So if you are a leader who's having there's a tension between yourself and that leader, or between the leader and their team. You hear all the complaints. You hear the complaints from the employees, you hear the complaints from the leader, but nothing's getting done. And so it festers and festers and festers, and it just becomes, something much bigger than it needs to be. So I think even when we, you can read it in people's tone, like the way they speak. How is it coming across, like when they are in a room together? And so if you see something and you feel that something's not right, something's not right.
Trust your gut.
Trust your gut.
At Impel Talent, we've worked with thousands of people and teams. And one thing is clear. People don't fail because they lack ambition. They struggle because they don't have a safe, unbiased space to learn, reflect, and grow.
Most people are growing quietly, under pressure, and often alone. And they're asking themselves, how do I lead without losing myself? How do I guide others when I'm still figuring it out? How do I build confidence when everything feels overwhelming?
It's not that they don't care. It's that traditional leadership development isn't connected to real life. Leaders don't need more checklists. They need space to pause, think, and make sense of their experiences. Because when people feel supported and understood, clarity grows, confidence builds, and they show up more grounded and intentional.
And that's why we built Impel Connect, a space for real leadership growth, real support, and real human connection. A platform that brings coaching, community, and development into one accessible place. Because growth shouldn't be exclusive. It should be available to anyone ready to invest in themselves.
So what are you waiting for? Join us at app.impeltalent.com. Webinars, workshops, coaching, and most importantly, community.
Impel Connect, genuine human connection in your pocket.
When you have two people, I find that's one of the more difficult. Of the three, at least you can immediately impact stuff. So let's say, like, when we're trying to run these different scenarios, I think when it's two of your team members that have an issue that you have seen or witnessed, or your if you're a director, your manager, and their relationship with an individual, or sometimes peer to peer, I think that can be one of the most difficult ones to know when is the right time to step in and when is the right time to push back.
Absolutely. And this is where that emotional intelligence comes in, right? Is really understanding, if I had to put myself in their shoes, what would be the steps? What would I say? Or even, again, using that emotional intelligence to be curious and ask questions on both sides. You're really hearing both sides of the story before you, as the maybe senior leader, is reacting. So I think these are all critical pieces that come back to that emotional intelligence, self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. Because when you have good relationships with each other, you're able to then have these open conversations, because that tension between maybe two people can grow into something bigger, and it's a cancer that can spread, which again impacts team morale, productivity, team effectiveness at the end of the day, which is what we are trying to avoid.
This topic's so interesting because I think when team members have challenges, you sometimes say, let's say you don't have the confidence issue, you're happy to address things directly. I can see leaders have overconfidence and like actually get too involved in problems that they need to push back on team members or give them the space to address together, and understand that they see the conflict, like you recognize the conflict and that you're there, but that actually they're responsible for trying to find ways to work through conflict. Because as we've said on our previous episode and the last couple of episodes, conflict can be healthy and it can be good, but if it's moving into more of a personal direction, there might be a time where you have to say, this is enough. We need to step in here. And there is a lot of emotions, people who don't like each other, there can be preferences. So you've got to be able to navigate very carefully how you address those individuals and how you give them the right level of support.
Agreed. And I think a final one that I think a lot of people are faced with today is making difficult decisions. So, examples like changes in the org structure, so role changes, or giving people more responsibility, or even taking responsibility away, or even exiting certain people as well. So making those, when those decisions are made, or you are delaying those decisions because you're avoiding the conversation. But again, how is that? So it keeps coming back to you asking the question, how is that impacting the team? how is that impacting the organization? And so if you keep coming back to the answer that it's a negative impact, you need to act. It's your responsibility as a leader to act. Because avoiding these issues are just going to, cause much bigger issues down the line.
We can coach agencies and companies on this aspect when they go through large organizational change, and people avoid wanting to make the announcements of stuff that the employees need. And similarly, sometimes people over communicate what shouldn't be communicated yet. But at the end of the day, organizations also operate in the same. So if we say avoid having tough conversations, it can be with the individual, it can be with two people in conflict, but it can also be, what conversation are you having with the business to explain decisions and things that maybe you're not completely comfortable with. And that's very difficult to have as a leader, whether it's redundancies, whether it's stuff that could be organizational shifts or the company's being acquired. We're all seeing all these different changes, especially in the modern working environment, the adoption of artificial intelligence. How are you showing up to make sure that you are able to have those difficult conversations as early, even if you don't know anything? Even if you're able to say, let's just have a sit down, I can feel, the changes and how you're doing. I just wanted to check in, talk to me. That's not always the easiest thing to do either, right? Seek feedback.
Yeah. I think a food for thought that I'd love to just on this point to leave with everybody is the most avoided conversations are often the most important for team effectiveness. And so I'd love for you to just let that marinate a little bit. When you are avoiding these conversations, really reflect on the impact it's having on the team effectiveness, which is what your responsibility as a leader is to create an effective and high performing team. What would you say is the cost or the impact to the team or the organization when we do avoid these conversations?
Well, you started to talk about it, but the team starts to take productivity hits, right? There's a lot of time spent on this negative energy that sort of circulates in the team, right? Whether it's conflict that's existing or individuals that aren't performing or they're kind of down. I even, these things you said the word fester. I thought that was fantastic. Like as things start to fester, they spread, and it can impact other team members if there's somebody that's not, particularly happy. So there's a massive cost not taking action. And I think you have to be able to prioritize that. Teams notice what leaders tolerate. Trust and credibility do decline overall when you're not deciding to have these conversations. Interestingly, when you're not having the tough conversations with low performers, it impacts high performers, which is insane, right? So if high performers aren't seeing that people are also being held accountable for poor performance, it almost can impact the ability for them to say, well, what's the point of my high performance if I'm going to get the same, treatment regardless either way? And there's this increased level of frustration, confusion. There can be misalignment. For me, I think as much, and we've talked about some of the symptoms. These are some of the symptoms. I think one of the root cause to when you don't do these things is it can really impact your culture. And, we have stuff on the wall, right? One of our values is integrity, but for integrity for me isn't just, integrity and inclusion isn't just the normals for integrity. It's like, do you hold yourself accountable to those in your team? Do you expect the same in return? Are we holding people to a different level of standard that is driving high performance? Because in an incredible environment, in a high level team, certain behaviors won't be tolerated, whether it be performance or behavior, and they are addressed quickly and cut out as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. So we said at the start of this episode, we're going to share a bit of how do we approach these conversations differently then? What tools can we share with the leaders or people listening on how to approach these conversations?
Come at it as a human, come at it with empathy. I know empathy gets, it's funny. I hear empathy all over the place, not just Married at First Sights. People say they're empaths and they've got really put yourself in somebody's shoes. So that's the first thing I would have, is like, come from a human perspective, have curiosity. I think that's the, important one that I know you've pushed into my brain loads. I think we make so much assumption as a leader. This is the reason it's not happening. I'm not happy with, but actually being inquisitive and coming at it from a partnership view is extremely important. So bring the human element, be curious, right? And I think there has to be a level of like believing that there is a change and that you are there for the right reasons. So if somebody really buys in that you're there to make change and their well-being is a priority, that's where change will happen and you'll see conflict hopefully dip. So I think for me, those are the three things I try and take into any difficult conversation. My fourth is control your emotions, which
Yeah.
I have low emotional control, as I say. I don't know. I might say that in every podcast, so everyone knows. Terrible poker player. I get very passionate. I really care for people, for the business, for performance. I've always been a high performer, and so when things don't go the right way for me, I know I'm sometimes like, wow, I'm a bit like upbeat. I'm a little erratic. I need time, go for a walk, clear my head, speak to someone. Because we said at the beginning of the episode, you need to come in it clear headed, factual, and supportive. The coaches in my career in rugby that screamed at me, hated them, right? Like in fact, I still wanted to do better because I wanted to put it in their face, but I was stuck because I couldn't leave that rugby team. So as I could have, but the ones that came to me knowing that they wanted to make me a better person, and I've had leaders like that in my professional career, where I know they're out there for me because they know they can get more from me. Those are the people I've worked the hardest for my entire career.
Love that. I think I think for me it's the person understanding that you're there to help them improve. Your intention is to help them improve and not to, throw stones or to blame. That they feel that they were heard. So really, just creating a two-way conversation, a two-way dialogue, and creating that space. I think you coming in as a leader, you get to create that with the other person. So that when you're coming in to have a difficult conversation, when you ask questions, you are inviting the other person to respond and for you to truly understand what's happening in their mind, and then really then adjust your course in that conversation. So not walking into that conversations with assumptions, but walking in curious, as you've said, walking in, giving them the benefit of the doubt that you're going to hear what they have to say. Now, what I've also realized, some of these conversations, the person may not fully be self-aware as well. So you can ask a question, but they have a completely different view of what's going on. Yeah. And so this is where you as a leader also need to realize, oh, I need to paint a picture. And this is where feedback, maybe from peers or from other teams, come into play. So really concrete, tangible feedback, because that helps that person understand and connect the dots, because then it's not just your own gut feel, but you're coming in and saying, this is what I've seen, this is what I've heard, and because something is mismatching here. Yeah. So you will find that as well, that it's not always that person's coming in and they fully get what you're trying to say, because they may be on cloud nine and you are on another planet, right? And so you need to then bring them back, bring both back together, and that's your role as a leader.
I love that you said that. And I think there's always a communication challenge as well, especially as we've mentioned, there's 5 different generations. We've had some great comments, which came from one of our very own, which I loved because it aligns with what you were saying. Renisha said a comment here that I love. It said, I've learned that it's not feedback that breaks people, it's disrespect packaged as leadership. Many professionals carry unnecessary emotional weight simply because someone in authority forgot the human on the other side. Leadership requires skill, yes, but it also requires humility and respect. And you were just mentioning it there. I think there is obviously there's the level of respect that is needed for these kind of conversations, and someone has to feel that level of respect. But I do feel like sometimes within different generations, you can find that people, the way that they behave or their attitude or can get viewed as one or the other as disrespectful. or is disrespectful, but you're balancing those levels of communication in those pieces of conflict, as you were saying, T. So I love that comment. What do you think, T? How do you think that relates from your perspective?
I agree. And I think it's not always comfortable. It's not. Being a leader, I think one of the things that we really need to accept, we need to accept the discomfort, that it is our leadership responsibility to operate in that space, to lead in that space, to understand what it means to lead in that space, because we will be put in that space majority of the time, to be honest. And we always say, and John Maxwell always says this as well, leadership is uphill. There's nothing downhill about it. It's tough. So when you put in these positions, if you like say, hey, it's all smooth sailing, then you got to ask, what am I not doing right? Because it is actually not easy. If you're trying to really do the leadership thing well, it's not easy. And so I think one of the things we need to understand also is that as leaders, we are also human. We do make mistakes. And I think the biggest thing is for that, if that leader can come and say, I'm really sorry, I got that wrong, you know what? That trust will be even more solidified between, because you're not always going to get it right. These conversations are not always going to be perfect either. But if that person is seeing that you are really trying, you're being vulnerable, you are, really saying, I acknowledge that. I acknowledge my actions here was not right in that moment. And I'm really sorry for that. You can move on from it. But if you, as a leader, are going to act like there's nothing, nothing wrong, nothing happened, and it's all on them and not on you, and you're not taking accountability as well as their leader, then the trust will be broken. It will be very difficult to restore it going forward.
I like what you said there, because I really like the vulnerability piece, because these are difficult conversations. People can say something that they didn't mean. People can interpret stuff the wrong way. I mean, I've done loads of reviews or delivered feedback, and I know I'm the same as you. I don't always get it right. I've said the wrong thing or something out of place, and I've loved that some of the times I've come into those meetings say, I apologize for that. That was not how I intended it, and I've taken ownership for it, and I'm aware that I would have come across this way. It kind of can diffuse the issue at hand.
The
Someone
sting.
says, exactly, it takes the sting out of it a little, and you go, but and I really appreciate letting people know how their actions have impacted yourself. So I know I just said earlier, don't be personal and you should be factual, but I also do love the fact of saying, hey, look, when an action is performed X, Y way, this is how I'm perceiving it. Help me understand, right? Should I be perceiving it that way? Is it disrespect? Is it that there's no accountability? Tell me. And I know it doesn't always can come across that way to somebody, but I think that curiosity and that openness, and that awareness to be like, hey, this is the situation, can make a massive difference.
Agreed. And I think the biggest one out of all of this that we've shared in terms of the how is the timing of the conversation. Make sure it happens early rather than later. I think that timeliness is the key. Timeliness, honest conversations. It doesn't need to be perfect. I think that's the key message from how to approach these conversations differently. And so I'd love to just wrap it up a little bit, because we've shared a lot around the why, around what the cost is, then how to approach these conversations. But what would you say would be a key message you would like to leave with the people listening on this topic?
I think we've said loads on this so far, so I want to try and think of something that'd be a little bit different. So the one thing I would leave is, as you mentioned, the directness of the speed to addressing some of these things can be really impactful. Like in the moment, whether that's pulling someone aside or addressing it, or it can make a massive difference. But I think the one thing that I always circle back to, which I said at the beginning, is you're responsible as a leader for your culture of a company. You get tested, your culture gets tested constantly typically, if you're managing people, it's because of this is what you get paid the big bucks for, right? They said, why would I take this next role? Because I'm going to get paid another 5 or 10K more, but the stress and the anxiety is like so much more because of the difficult conversations. And the reality is you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. You have to be willing, as you mentioned, to learn, to listen. And honestly, you have to just get thrown into it. And you mentioned it. I've been learning all the time. I think every time I have a tough conversation, I reflect on it, I listen, I speak with yourself, and I try and grow from it.
Great. I'd love to leave one reflection with everybody, and it's 2 questions. The first one is, what is one conversation you are currently avoiding? And what would change if you addressed it now?
Mm.
So I'm going to leave that with you to think about in light of everything we've spoken about, to really take this in from a practical perspective, take it into your world and apply what we've said. And we'd love to hear from you. Send us notes, send us comments. You can connect with us on LinkedIn and let us know. We'd love to hear how these episodes and these tools are actually helping you in your day-to-day leadership. So really, thank you, Nate, for all your insights, for your wisdom on this topic. I really enjoyed just unpacking it a bit. We've just touched the tip of the iceberg here. So if anybody is looking for any support, a sparring partner, a coach, you know where to find us. Please connect with us. And we really enjoy having these open conversations. So have an amazing rest of the day, and we will see you in the next episode.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And it was amazing to get some feedback on the comment section. We really want these sessions to be as much as possible engaging. So if you guys are feeling up to it, drop a comment, ask a question, give your perspective. Join us, follow, subscribe, join the channel. Join us on Impel Connect if you fancy really digging into coaching and leadership. But again, I mirror what Terentia said. Thank you guys for joining and learning, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you so much for joining us for our latest episode of Breaking the Chain. If you'd like to see more episodes, you can check us out online at www.impeltalent.com/podcast. And if you'd like to perhaps put a question into us or be featured on one of our next episodes, you can email us at info@impeltalent.com. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week.